and welcome to From Nowhere to Nothing, Ontological Oxymorons. I'm your host, Joel Bouchard, a graduate student in education at Liberty University. And with me is Mr. Norman Gayford, a professor of English and philosophy at Genesee Community College. There are moments in life when we experience things that are beyond words. Maybe we get goosebumps when we're not cold, or shed a tear when we aren't happy or sad. Often in these moments, perhaps while viewing a picture of the cosmos or hearing a musical masterpiece, we are feeling something that is beyond ourselves, beyond our reason. We're feeling awe. But what is awe? Well, it's something beyond words that we must use words to describe. So already, I kind of wrote that intro while doing some of the research, and there's already some stuff that people from different philosophical camps might debate. Such as saying that awe is something that's beyond our reason, especially Kant, Yeah. And that was we were talking about it before we started recording. That's kind of the problem that you run into. The deeper you research awe, the more you find that people from different philosophical camps will contradict one another. They don't really come to any sort of mutual consensus about a lot of it. So you have Kant who's saying, that awe or the sublime is something that's beyond our imagination, but that we can reasonably understand and that we need to sort of accommodate that view. And then you have others who say, no, awe is something that's beyond our reason or our imagination stretches out to understand.
Yep.
And you have some people that say awe is, the highest form of beauty. And then you have Burke who says, well, no, awe and beauty are mutually exclusive. If you have beauty, it's like looking at a painting in a proper light, whereas horror is, complete darkness, and the sublime is complete light, so you can't make out anything around you. That all of these sorts of different arguments where
it blends into the aesthetic, it blends into the psychological,
right? And then ultimately, you have these really kind of big ontological problems about philosophers from different camps trying to come together and figure out what is this thing that we experience that is just beyond us. And that seems to be the one kind of connecting factor, is that it's beyond us.
Yeah.
So let's start out. What is awe?
So let's go with the etymology that you and I have both revisited. And so the word itself emerges from Old Norse and Old English, a filtered combination, which initially meant dread, great fear, overwhelming terror, and I think it's important for us to recognize where it comes from, because of course any concept can be shifted, changed. Language is organic. We've talked about language more than once, and that's okay. But I think that language also can trivialize. And so we go from a word that, when people were talking about an experience that was beyond them in the sense of being able to immediately articulate it, and we come into the 21st century now where we have wholly trivialized the word in some ways, so that it's not a word indicating a grand anything. It all comes trippingly off the tongue whenever something decent happens. Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I did this today. Awesome. That's great. No, pretty much not. I mean, I've done it. We use this word because we just start using the word. But if it is indeed this powerful, at least partially beyond us, or beyond us in the sense of easily articulating it, then to say something is awesome, just to snap. Oh, there, it just reduces the power of it.
Right.
So I've bookended us. Right. I started with the ancient and the fearsome. I mean, terror. Now, we talk about wars on terror and all of the... You can't have a war on awe, except unless you use language to dismantle the very feeling.
Right. Which is what we're going to try to do. But yeah, you're absolutely right. So yeah, awesome. That's kind of I think about it. I've given you a Ninja Turtles cup to drink out of, and that's Ninja Turtles are awesome.
Awesome, yeah.
So
Great.
I think that the modern equivalent to that is kids saying, "Oh, that's epic. It's epic, man."
That's right.
It's always, and again, it's that word that's you're using it to try to describe something that has in unbelievable vastness, but you're using it in just sort of an off the cuff way that doesn't really honor that.
Yeah, it makes it safe.
Right.
It's not that people are using it in an inauthentic way, but they're using it in a way that doesn't, as you say, honor the intensity and the vastness of the implication of the word.
Yeah, because a lot of the dictionary definitions that I ran across of awe, reverence is part of the description. You have to have reverence for a vastness or a greatness that's sort of beyond your, your thoughts. So, so that's part of it. And you brought up an interesting part with the war on terror and that sort of thing. Because somebody asked that on Facebook recently. I'm friends with a guy who he likes to ask very just broad philosophical questions, and he has a number of followers, and you get a lot of interesting conversations happening. But that was one of his questions was, what is a terrorist? And a lot of people responded with the dictionary definition. And the thing is, if you look at the dictionary definition, it's not an etymological one at all. No. If you break down the word terrorist, it's essentially somebody who, somebody who's causing terror.
Yeah, it's almost a tautological, it's defining itself.
Right.
Using the word.
And that's not at all what the dictionary definition says. And so you're right. What words mean and how we use them tends to change over time. So if we look at if we get back to the historical and we look at it, awe was very much centered around fear. Do you think that's still relevant today? Do you think awe still has fear, or do you think other words have taken that place? Do you think horror is synonymous with what awe was at the beginning of the word? Or
I think there is an element of it that found its way into religious practice. To fear God is a phrase, or Allah, or is long time as a phrase in various traditions. But I don't think that it means fear as in the sense of tremble because you're going to get stomped on. Although I think there's an element of that there, but I don't think that's the primary thing. So dread or horror or is what H.P. Lovecraft tried to do. I'm going to take way sideways here because it's one of the people I've studied and written about a lot. And Lovecraft was trying to work on a kind of 20th century return to the idea of true horror, which is to be overwhelmed by the vastness and the ancientness of things. Okay, so whether we go to the religious and say God, or we go to this the secular and talk about God's lowercase, or whatever we do, if we look at the sky and we're on a June night or indeed a winter night and we're under the stars, and we say, "This is grand. This is huge. I'm tiny, but I still think it is amazing." You have that combination of the dread, the realization in some sense of what a speck of dust we are. The pale blue dot, as Carl Sagan called it. And yet how incredible it is that as a planet, we are not awesome in the scheme of the universe.
Yeah.
But in the sense of trying to appreciate the universe for those moments when we do, at the same time as surviving, that's where I think the real awesome, the real combination of dread and appreciation, a humble appreciation of the vastness of things.
Yeah, and Lovecraft is really, he's amazing at that sort of thing. nobody's read him, you should, because it doesn't require a huge investment in time. Lovecraft can do in less than one page. He can make you feel that sort of awesome dread. Very well practiced in that sort of writing. And,
but what did he do? What he was doing, because I think this is a good touchstone for us to talk about this. He purposefully worked at not being overly specific in the ways that any one of his characters was experiencing the dismantlement of life or the being taken apart by the universe itself. It was quite abstract, marvelous multisyllabic adjectives that essentially meant, well, this vague nebulous thing was affecting me in unspeakable ways.
Yeah. And so Lovecraft is really good at that sort of thing. And there's lots of other
Poe was good at it.
Yeah, there's different authors that can. And then on the other hand, you have Franz Kafka. It was almost kind of at the inverse. Like he wrote these long novels that led to this different kind of horror where it was almost this very specific. You have like The Trial or The Castle or something where he very specifically goes through each small phase of a character's life and greatly dismantles it. But it's almost the same sort of thing. Beyond it all, there's the castle, or there's the judge, or somebody that you never see and never has any direct impact, but there's always these things coming down from them that influence the character's life.
Yes.
And it is sort of that same way. You might as well replace the castle or the judge or whoever it is with God or what is beyond, right? The beyond. And that's sort of the, if we get into what elements constitute awe, there's that something that's beyond. And so let's look at that. My big question about this, what elements constitute awe, is do we have to have mystery for us to have awe?
I think so. I really do.
Yeah, and I think so too.
Yeah.
I think we should go into it a little bit though, because there are things that can constitute awe that aren't really all that mysterious. And so that sounds a little bit contradictory, but let's think about it. So
let's do an example.
Works of art, for instance, there's a cathedral. A cathedral was constructed with human hands. It's not something that's beyond humans. Maybe it took more than one person, different types, artists, architects, engineers, all different types of people, but it was constructed by people. But still, you might walk into a cathedral and feel awe.
That was what you were supposed to do. That's what it's designed to do. And so it's huge. So that vast space up in the dark above the arches is to suggest space itself, is to suggest, or the spiritual space of the heavens where God is ensconced. The Sistine Chapel has amazing things in it. I haven't seen it in person, but we've all seen, I think many of us seen the pictures. And most of us maybe have walked into even a small chapel. Churches don't accomplish this architecturally in the sense of especially current constructed churches, and that's not bashing. It's just, it doesn't. These designs, these medieval designs, were to make us realize how small we are, and the mystery of what's up there in the dark. So that mystery is there in the architectural art.
Yeah, and I mean, you can look at the same thing. A lot of these human constructed influences of awe, whether it's a piece of music or a painting or something, it's constructed by people, but there's still mystery there. So, which leads to an interesting kind of line of reasoning. So if we agree that awe must have an element of mystery, but we also agree that human designed works can influence awe, then can somebody awe themselves?
That's interesting. Oh, you asked the best questions. All right, so yes. Okay, so let's use an example from each one of us to the degree we want to play with it, however briefly. But I've told you many times that I take art lessons. And I've been learning more about a number of different things. Very eclectic, but I've been learning. But I occasionally will create something that stuns me. That is not to say that I created and say, oh, look at this piece of work that is going to be in a museum. No, it's not. It's for me. It's for maybe one or two pairs of eyes that may see it. But the point is, and I've said this, talked to my teacher about this many times, who's an old friend, but who's teaching me. I recognize that it is beyond what I thought the piece would be. There are elements that take me out of myself and into the subject matter in ways that occasionally either make me lose just for a moment, take a hesitant breath, or look at it and say, wow, you actually caught just a bit of what light really does, which is not to say there can't be, one learns, one keeps going.
But it's almost accidental, right?
Yeah.
Because that's the thing is, with art, it seems no matter what kind of art you set out to do, and I'm not sure if this is true of the masters. I saw a recent article about, they discovered a Da Vinci painting where there's Christ holding a glass orb, and the light isn't reflected the way it should be unless the orb is hollow and the glass is less than 3 millimeters thick or something. And there's this debate. Did Da Vinci mean to portray it that way? Because, he was a master of optics and this stuff, so there's no way he could have made this mistake. Or was he trying to portray something else that was beyond, the visual? Like, what was going on there? And so it makes you wonder if Da Vinci experienced the same things that we do. But I know artists on your or my level, we're not in control of the end product of what we start. Anytime we start something, we have an idea of where we want to go, but it never ends up being what we set out for. I'm here
to tell you what I learned from my teacher is that really anyone who is totally involved in it doesn't absolutely know the end point either. Da Vinci quite probably did not know the end point, and Da Vinci was a human being, and so of course, I think this is what we do in the 21st century particularly. And I'm going to sound really strange if any of my students ever hear this, because I teach science writing and this kind of thing. But both sides of the brain, stereotypically, are functioning. If we have this tendency, this sometimes an unnerving but certainly annoying tendency to reduce everything to data points. So we'll talk about the millimeter, and then it's fascinating to talk about how thick that glass is supposed to be with the orb, as you described. But we do whatever is within our power sometimes to reduce to controllable elements things that are truly beyond us. This happens in my profession all the time when you have people who are so obsessively trying to make writing instruction, as one example, a science. Or a business, education as business, as commodification, that there's no room for the discussion anymore of, well, how do I know? It's like saying, how do I know that it's good art? You know it when you see it, right? Well, how do I know this is better writing? Well, I can say that it has a vocabulary, but it's not about multisyllabic vocabulary all the time. It's not about consulting a thesaurus and throwing things together. It's about the very essence of the sentence. Essence itself is a vague word, right? But people don't like that. Give me a rubric. Let me break it down into multiple columns. So how can I replicate that? What can I do, people say in writing, to fix it? Artists don't always think in terms of fixing something. They may go, our teachers, you go with what you've done. Maybe you've made something that you didn't want to have happen. Well, you've got a choice. You can throw it out, or you can say, how do I work with this?
Yeah, I was listening to a really fascinating discussion by Alan Watts talking about
marvelous writer.
How in the 20th and 21st century, humanity has taken to trying to define everything in terms of structure and not form. And so as the telescopes looked at things smaller and smaller, the telescopes looked at things bigger and bigger, and the microscopes looked at things smaller and smaller. What they kept finding is that you'd find more and more structure. And so the natural human instinct was to say, well, what is that made up of? What is, what is an atom made up of? Well, what is a quark made up of? Well, what is a, or, well, what's beyond this and this and the other thing? And his, the takeaway from was, he said, there's always going to be more structure. You'll never find the end of it. And the reason is because you're the universe. It's the universe trying to look at itself. And he said, what happens if you try to look at the back of your own head? You turn and it turns away from you, and so it doesn't, you'll never see it. And he said that that's really a distortion of Western language, because it's all predicated on the idea that a verb needs a noun.
Yeah.
But if you look at, you say it's raining, well, what's raining? Nothing is raining. It's just rain. Yeah. Rain is happening. And he said it's the same thing. People are just peopling.
Yes.
There's no
students are studenting. Right. You use that word sometimes to wash people's eyes when you say, "I hope you're studenting well today."
So that brings up a really sort of mind-bending idea.
Awesome.
But it's kind of but it's kind of important, right? Because we realize, you and I, we've done a show on language, and we've done a show on a lot of these different things. Mm-hmm. And what you realize is that Oz, it is rooted in that, the very fabric of our concepts. And so if our language is based around a noun and a verb, then no wonder when we see action, we feel like we must attribute that action to a subject.
Yeah.
And that might not necessarily be true. The entire universe may be form and not so much structure.
The
very
ontological.
Much
They're very much like
you're saying. If I start, I can watch or read all kinds of courses on songwriting and all of the empirical things you can do to improve songwriting. Mm-hmm. But at some level, you just have to write a song. You can't just put together a number of tips and have a song. You need to actually do something.
And you get to a place where you feel like, here's where I think it connects totally with what we're talking about. You get to a place sometimes with your songs. I know you must, because you write amazing things. You get to the place where I was working on a poem the other night, way too late, but I'd done some student work, and I thought, okay, I'm writing. And I was basing it on a photograph that I'd taken that was a sunrise, and there was the decrescent moon, it's called. Not crescent moon, but decrescent means it's declining. And I thought of that word, and I thought of other words that are similar with it. And I'm shaping this, and I write a line with, no, that's not quite right. And other words down below, space in between. And then you start to grow it's like you're putting out plants. You don't have a garden yet. You're just laying things out. How should I put this? Oh, let's shape this. Should this rhyme? I don't often do that when but I think it would. But it's not going to have the same rhythm in this stanza as this one. And you get to the end of it, and you're way too tired, and so you think you've done something better than maybe you have. But you still recognize, if you can read that and say, yeah, that says something authentic to my experience. To my experience with another person, to my experience with sunrise as well. It becomes metaphorical and it becomes literal, and you feel it. At least you must with your song. Something you hear yourself sing it, and you come to the end and say, "Yeah, I don't know that I could explain what I just did." Well, mystery is something that's close to inexplicable. Not mystery like the genre of literature, but the most definitions of mystery will begin with something that one experiences that is almost not able to be explained. Mm-hmm. That almost is important.
Right.
The sublime. Now, what was your research into the word sublime? Because that's also related to awesome.
Yeah. Sublime was... They're very, very interrelated, but the sublime tended to be something that was beyond.
There's the beyond again.
Right.
How far beyond? If totally beyond, then perhaps we can recognize it in ourselves, but that would suggest that we can never articulate it. For beings of speech, that's just a pain in the ass. It's like you got to be able to articulate, but you try to articulate it. Well, you try to articulate it with color, with a brush, with sculpting, with writing music, bars of music, composing. My son's a composer. You're a composer. With dance, or with puppetry, as my daughter does. So all these different forms that you're in transfiguring in reverse your experience of the incredible, the unbelievable, into something that manifests in a way that perhaps someone might look at and say, oh, yeah, I kind of get what that is.
It sort of raises the question, is art, and I mean that art is just a general term, music, poetry, anything you can consider a form of art. Is that just our way of trying to express sublime or awesome concepts, since we instinctually know that we can't linguistically portray them in regular language?
My limited experience of it, and I teach aesthetics sometimes, but limited in the sense of one human being. Yes. I mean, the thing that drives so many artists nerds is when a person you'll be at an art display, like Clothesline Art Festival in Rochester, perhaps, and you have labored. You have worked. Your work is out there. There's nothing more vulnerable than that. Writing in a classroom is the same way. A teacher like me says we're all reading each other's work. That's vulnerability. But it's important for the honesty of it. And here's your work. And someone comes along and says, well, what's that supposed to be? Well, I could do that, or my grandson could do that in junior high school, or they want $100 for that. And it's an insult that's trying to commodify and reduce to, oh, well, it looks like that, therefore it's better art. I defy you to paint a picture of God and say, it looks like that, which is part of the reason I think that Islam never does not allow representations of God. But there's all kinds of ways around that. For point being that when one reduces any concept to something which is totally so totally familiar that it has lost anything other than strict representationalism, on a superficial level, then that is not awesome. That is skill. It's technical skill, first-rate technical skill. But I wouldn't say it's awesome.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because, it makes you think that it's almost awe we talked about it, structure and form. And can you see awe in both of them, or does it require a combination? Or, how does that, because like you were saying, there's definitely people who do hyper-realistic paintings, or people who are technical geniuses on an instrument, or those sorts of things.
Yes.
And I think they definitely create things that are awesome.
Yeah.
And then there's other people, I have a recent one. I never liked listening to Nirvana because I always told myself, well, they suck. And I think I'm starting to have a new appreciation for them, because what I'm realizing is, no, Kurt Cobain knew he sucked, but that wasn't what it was about. He was completely form over function. He wasn't worried about being a technical guitar wizard. As a matter of fact, he's completely against it. He would, on purpose, use just junk gear and not tune his guitars because he was trying to create something that was different from what everybody else was doing. And that, some people can look at that as being slightly pretentious or however you want. But the fact of the matter is, like you talked about, if you're in an art gallery or whatever, if you're not the artist, you don't really have the authority to make that kind of judgment,
You can talk about form.
Right.
You can talk about the constituent elements. You can be trained to recognize. People can be taught to understand why something is beautiful with the word capital B, and thus get it intellectually, but still not necessarily feel it. This is, I think, what partly Burke was talking about.
Yeah.
With reason, using reason in the face of nature. That's not what the Romantics were doing, though. The capital R Romantics, the painting, the Hudson Valley School of Painting. And I think it's good we've gone to art because it's a common thing, right?
Yeah.
So romantic painting was saying, look at the vastness of the world, and look how tiny you are. So you'd have these remarkable mountainsides. You'd have these huge rivers and outcroppings of rock, and there'd be one person with a little walking stick standing on the which is sort of akin to an Old Testament verse where God is confronting a human being and essentially says, where were you when I laid the foundations of the world? Well, that's what the romantic painting, even whether it's trying to be spiritual or it's not that it's locked into a religious tradition, but it's showing us the foundations of the world read as universe, not just as,
right.
as planet. Just in that one line, there's an example of sublimity.
Yeah, and I think there's probably a lot of people at this point are like, when did this become an aesthetics conversation? But it really is, because that's what awe is about. Awe is about value judgments. We're trying, and it's a very important point that not everybody places the same value or the same judgment on what value is. I remember, one of the most powerful cinematic moments that I've seen is, the last scene of 2001: A Space Odyssey. I remember very clearly one time I had waited until my wife was out of the house to watch it for this very reason. She came home during the last 15 minutes of the movie and said, "What is this?"
Yeah. Yep.
There was no awe. There was no,
total puzzlement.
Right. Yeah. And I can tell you right now, watching the whole movie did not help either. It just goes to show there's very different reasons or very different things that might inspire awe. I don't think it's that my wife has no appreciation for the sublime.
Of course not.
It's just
no.
So different things will trigger it for different people. And so that's where the aesthetics comes in, trying to figure out, well, what is it that does that? What elements constitute it? We've gone over mystery, and we've sort of talked about how we've talked about the human aspect of it, and we've talked about fear a little bit, and how I think that the original idea of awe was more fear inspired, but I think that there still is that edge to it nowadays. And this was a big topic of it in philosophical history, was that some philosophers put forth that you cannot feel physical fear and awe at the same time. And I kind of side with them. I think you can feel an intellectual dread or fear or reverence. Reverence, I think, is the better word. But I think that if you're feeling physical fear or danger, I think your mind shuts that part off, the awe part. If you see these giant crashing waves out and you can feel awe, but if you are on the boat in the giant crashing waves, I don't think that you feel it anymore. I think it becomes, there's something else.
The sublime terror. This is what Poe was talking about. Yeah, that's a marvelous example. Paintings of oceans are great. And I love walking next to the ocean, the water coming. Do I want to see a 30-foot high wave and be on the boat with it? No, I'd be seasick and think we're going to drown. So, the fear of the horror writers, for instance, and not just that, the eschatology, which is the study of death and death rituals and so on. It's sublime to realize that you will be taken apart. Sublime is not gentle, kind, and initially Sublime itself was raw confrontation with the raw vastness. And so fear with Lovecraft, with Poe, with Frankenstein, with Mary Shelley, fear was confronting the irreducible, overwhelming certainty of dissolution, of disappearing, of death.
So to clarify, these writers, as a reader, we can experience awe. But if we were the subjects in the books, would we be able to experience?
We'd be experiencing the sublime terror and dread. It would be awe of the Norse kind. It would not be awe of the 21st century. Cute, wonderful, we got it under control, but isn't this great kind?
Right. Huh. Yeah, it's interesting. It makes you wonder if you put yourself in the shoes of these characters,
That's precisely it. If you're not just, I'm safely in my, I mean, you know the experience. Most people, I think, probably do who read. I say that because a lot of people don't anymore. But most, you're in the book, quite literally. Mm-hmm. You are not in your own space. You come back out of it somehow. Time has passed. If that book has been so engrossing, you have been living with the sublimity or whatever the particular feeling is. The sublime is not an emotion. The sublime is an experience.
Right.
And we talked about emotions, right? So yeah, it's about living it through these characters. That's why the safety of, the metacognitional, where people just say, well, I'm going to talk about the very thing that I'm experiencing while I go, well, look at those special effects. Or, well, I hate it when people do that in movies. Yeah. Leave it alone. Go away. This is why I like to watch DVDs at home, because don't mess with my experience. And yet, when people watch something and they are actually responding with tears, with laughter, with, oh no, they've totally accepted it. They are in that moment. And I think that's why people go to horror films or read horror novels. It's, go ahead, scare me. Don't just scare me. I dare you to scare me so much that I don't even want to get off the couch because somebody might be in my house.
Right.
Right?
So I'll postulate something. We have awe and we have the sublime.
Yeah.
It would appear, based on our conversation so far, that awe can be something experienced within an individual, but the sublime is something outside that you must have an interaction with.
I'm sure I can just hear voices of my teachers.
I like
saying,
putting
what have you done?
I like putting you in these situations where
where I said go, right.
Somebody's going to jump on you if they hear this and you make the wrong choice.
Well, you've got this whole, not pedigree, but provenance of the trail of what you've learned, and you want to be as true to it as you can, knowing full well that your mentors would say, well, you messed that one up, didn't you? We say the sublime. We put the definite article with it. Therefore, it's something recognizable from without, but fuses from within. I mean, if you're dissolving into the experience, you are not separate from it any longer. You are becoming the constituent elements of the universe. And if you look at a painting that draws you that 30-foot tidal wave or whatever it is, that for a moment you are just caught up with the light and your mind is generating the sound and see that experience. That's awe. That is being one with the sublime. That is being affected by the sublime. But I think this is true of relationships. We can move outside of art, and if we get really, you have connections with human beings, and sometimes you have that rare and wondrous interaction. This doesn't have to be a romantic interaction. That someone doesn't frighten you necessarily, but the fact that of their being, this is ontological, of their being in the sphere of your own being, that you revere them I mean, what does reverence mean? Reverence doesn't mean just honoring and say, oh, well, I revere you because I like you. To reverence suggests a power beyond yourself, a kind of fear, as well as an equality, because you see the power of that individual. You look in someone's eyes, and you are taken away, perhaps romantically, or perhaps just out of a sense of friendship, or out of a sense of mutuality. You can see that they are fully alive, and some of the things that they've seen, and they tell you what they've seen. This is why we read memoirs. This is why you tell me the story of what you've experienced, and if you tell it well enough, I'm going to say, "Oh my gods, that's reverence. That is sublimity. That is." People would want me to do shutting up for a moment and saying, I don't have words. People tell you things about their lives, and you say, I just, and they know that you're feeling empathic, and you're also feeling like, I don't have words to encompass what you've gone through.
So let's have that discussion then. So I alluded to it at the beginning. There's Kant, who says that awe, or the sublime, is the ability to rationally understand something outside of what we can conceptualize, in other ways, emotionally and whatnot. And then you have Burke and some others who would say that no, the sublime or awe is something that you cannot rationalize, but it's the act of stretching your imagination to try to understand something that you can't actually rationally comprehend. Where do you land on that argument?
I think the Burkean.
Yeah.
For ethics, no one beats Kant for me and what he was trying to accomplish. But for this, I think the Burkean, because that reaching out. Just think for a minute. How many different, whether it's TV, movies, pieces of art, or whatever, where you wanted to touch, or in fact a character. What happens in any kind of, whether it's horror or science fiction or whatever, where a character sees something strange, the closet door is starting to melt, and you in yourself say, "Run! Run! What are you doing?" And they're going, "I want to touch this. What's going on?" And if it's done well, that's honest. Mm-hmm. Every rational element of one's being might say, "Go now." But I've never seen anything like this before, and we're sort of doing this quick mental, perhaps, negotiation with the universe, which is meaningless. We think we have this contract, and we don't. So I'll watch this, I'll appreciate it, and you'll let me live. Maybe not. Mm-hmm. That's what the horror fiction does. It's really serious. Yeah, you may see this incredible thing, and then the alien gobs you up. You may see this vast. Nietzsche said, if you look into the abyss long enough, the abyss begins to look back into you, and that's sublime. Mm. The imp of the perverse, which was a concept going back into earlier horror, the Castle of Otranto and things, Gothic fiction. And the imp of the perverse was articulated by Poe as well as others, which is that little voice that says, jump, feel it, see what this feels like. And I'm not in any way romanticizing that, but it's there in our heads, and that's a sublime and terrible. I think most of us could, if we were really honest, would say sometimes if you're at the edge of Letchworth Park at the Great Bend, and you look at how many people violate the signage and sense, climb over on top of the wall or over it, not even beginning to think how far back underneath that wall has been gouged out.
Right.
knowing that there are hundreds of feet and pointy trees down below, but they go out anyway. What are they doing?
Yeah, there's no rational explanation for it. It's that I think it is stretching your imagination. You want to look over the edge and you want to imagine. You almost want to imagine. Nobody, I don't think, rationally, nobody wants to feel what it's like to jump off and get smashed into the ground. But somewhere, you kind of want to imagine what it's like to fall through the air and sort of feel that, you want to look down and imagine it.
So that voice, that I'm not talking about mental health issues. I'm talking about, but the recognition of that. What do we say it is to live? What do all the advertisements even, they trivialize it so often, not all, but some do this. Don't just drive fast. I mean, that's an old concept not since back to the beginning of cars. People thought they were going to be suffocated if they drove over 30 miles an hour. You just can't do that. But then you found out you can. What's life if it's not being all you can be? But being all you can be means also being all you might not survive.
Right. And so it's like you said before, it's just nature looking and saying, yeah, you get to see great things, but then maybe that's it.
Maybe that's it.
And so, yeah, it brings you to an interesting place. And when I think about it, it kind of reflects a lot of the conversation we've had so far. We've gone back and forth between these sort of yin and yang of rationality and imagination, mm-hmm. or form and structure, or all of these things. And I think that awe and the sublime is really that edge point. It's the event horizon of the black hole. Mm-hmm. Everybody wants to know what's beyond it, but you can't, or that's the end view. So it's just getting to that point where you want to see, you want to see. All right, well, and I think that it can be the form and it can be the structure, because there's something awesome about the scientific revelations about the structure of it.
Absolutely.
And but then there's the form aspect of it too, where just in its, without thinking of anything of what it's made up of or whatever. There's the Event Horizon Telescope picture that came out last
mm-hmm,
year.
Mm-hmm. Amazing picture.
Yeah, you just look at it, and if you look at the structure of it, there's nothing real awesome about it. It's a fuzzy black circle with an orangish red ring around it.
But
it's that stretching of the imagination.
Yeah.
But it's the combination. You're stretching the imagination, just taking in what it is you're looking at. But then there's all of the structure of not just your scientific knowledge about what a black hole is, but the scientific knowledge of the experts that put in the terabytes of data and the thousands of hours of man work to achieve it. Mm-hmm. And it's the combination. It's not the combination of the two. Each one sort of stands on its own. But the combination of the two really makes it. And it's
if you look at that picture and you can't feel the at once the dread of the power of such a natural formation and the appreciation for the very presence of it. There's an implied threat with black holes, right? There, but but that's far away, so I'm kind of safe. But maybe not. And if we have one at the center of our own galaxy, and but how do we? But you think of the common terminology for these things: monster and giant, and all of those terms that used to be used for mythological explications of the universe. And now we're coming back to them. I don't know if we ever abandoned them, but we're back to them.
Yeah, I just watched Interstellar last week, and they have the Gargantua, the black hole.
Yeah,
and it is, it's that kind of thing where we're getting to it. Mm-hmm. Like we talked about the original purpose of it. There's the mystery, and there's the fear, and there's the wonder, And the reverence.
And that's right. There are the other two parts, the wonder and the reverence.
Mm-hmm. So it took us 50 minutes, but I think that we got to the essence of what awe is.
Not bad.
Yeah. So why do we experience it? And again, you don't like talking about purpose. What is the purpose of awe? Why would we experience it?
It's not that I don't like talking about it, Joel. I just don't think that I'm not teleological. I don't look at something and say, "Oh, well, what's the point of that?" or what's its purpose? But that's not my first thing. But it's okay. Why would we have? What would we be without being able to be flattened by moments of realizing what we are and what we aren't? What you just described with that black hole, what would it be if we were not even interested in trying to understand the universe? There are people who want us to be that way. I've encountered students who said, "Oh, well, everything that we don't understand, that's God's or whatever," and so it's just we don't worry about it. We just don't worry about it. Don't worry, be happy. Just and I wonder sometimes if people who say those things even begin to understand what awe, sublimity, awesomeness really is.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not trying to preach to people who are of religious focus, but I'm just saying, just as one example, if you can look at a black hole, an event, or and say, well, it has nothing to do with me. That's way too far away. If anything ever happened with that, I'm going to be long gone. You're totally dismissing. You're running away from by dismissing. Not interested, not curious. To abandon curiosity is to abandon awe. So that's for me. If you want a purpose, that's its purpose.
Yeah, and I think that climate change is kind of a big one right now. You see some of the policies being enacted, and I think that not the explicit. I think the explicit reasoning behind it is for economic reasons, but I think the implicit excuse that nobody wants to talk about is that a lot of the people making some of these environmentally negative policies, the attitude is that I'm going to be gone if there are any consequences.
Yep.
And like you were saying, it does. It kind of makes you think, well, then awe isn't really a thing. And I like seeing astrobiological sort of postulations on these things. I remember hearing an astrobiologist talk one time about how, there's probably a lot of worlds out there that can support life.
Yeah.
And there's nothing to say intelligent life couldn't evolve in water. Mm-hmm. And a lot of these plants are completely water-based. But they said, even if that happened, they wouldn't be able to see the sky, so they might not know that there's outer space, if there's anything beyond it, so they would have no reason to explore or develop technologies that would contact anybody or do anything. Yeah. And that entire idea kind of blew my mind a little bit. Like, if let's say that we were able to survive in the water, we had our little, imagine an Atlantis civilization, or whatever, we wouldn't have an awe of a black hole or even an awe of other planets with other, species. Like, that might not be a concept that would ever occur to us.
Unless, and this would be an experience of horror and terror, which is what we do whenever we go fishing. To yank something out of its element, to bring it into an entirely different place where it cannot survive. Imagine the horror of something yanking us out of this into another, just like that. Suddenly we're yanked out. We can't breathe. We don't know what's going on. It's an entirely new dimension. Put me back. But once you go back, you can't not know that was out there. Mm-hmm. Right. So yeah, if you're nice and ensconced civil, this is, I think, in some ways, what's happening to our civilization. or perhaps more narrowly our own society. We wanted to think nothing can touch us, nobody can touch us. We're fine. We're just in this nice bubble. We just want to be in a bubble. We want to build walls. We want to build to just keep me enclosed. Can't happen anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Probably never could have, but it's certainly, and so, yeah, things are scary. Things are immense. Australia is burning. You want to come to climate change. Ask people there on the coastline about what awe is. Because you hear words like that in the interviews with people who are surviving this, or you just see an image. The polar ice cap's not there.
Mm-hmm.
There's chunks. Glacier Park won't be Glacier Park, except in name, within less than 20 years now, apparently. I've walked on a glacier that will no longer exist. Does that mean the end of the universe? No, heavens no. The Earth will go on even if we were all gone, and some of us will survive, but it is dreadfully sublime if one looks at it eyes on and says, I can't run away from this.
Right. Yeah. And it makes you wonder, is awe diminishing in modern times, or is it being changed into something else? And like I said, I watched Interstellar this week, and there's just a number of fantastic lines in that movie that yes. describe exactly the problems that are facing 21st century world.
Yes, there are.
At one point,
Let's speak some of them.
His father-in-law says, the world didn't run out of flat screen TVs, it ran out of food, Mm-hmm. Or, the main character says, we used to look up in the sky and think about our place in the stars, and now we just look at the ground and wonder about our place in the dirt, Mm-hmm. And those are important sort of questions or, statements when we're talking about awe in modern times. And like you said, I think that what is the human predisposition? I guess that's the question we're trying to get at. Is the predisposition to find that comfort zone and try to live within it and avoid awe or the sublime at all costs? Or is it to venture out and try to experience that uncomfortability? What do you think the natural disposition is?
I think the natural disposition is what you just described, to venture. And I promise not to try to wax nostalgic, because we talked about nostalgia too. But it seems to me that there has been a multi-layered training in our culture. And I can't speak planet-wide, but because the rest of the planet is doing some things, but not to be curious, not to ask questions. Keep your head down. Just do what you're supposed to. And I'm not saying that hasn't always been there, but most of our pop cultural images of, let's say, going to space are much less optimistic now than they used to be, couched in terms of corporatism and imperialism and so I think that we have collectively been working at trying to diminish the exterior awe in our next generations. Not all of us, some of us very much actively try to say, what are we doing? But I think if you look at curricula and you're in education, you really got how curricula are designed. Well, let's just not make it controversial. Let's not scare people. Let's just, if you look at the challenges of reading levels and reading levels continue to decline, capacity of people to read it when they leave high school now is much diminished compared to what was 25, 30 years ago in our culture. So, and when you have fewer words, that doesn't mean you can't experience the sublime. But the terror may well completely outweigh that's frightening. Let's go there.
Right.
If you're at the, that's frightening, let's not even, then the curiosity is gone. And our ancient tales, often warlike. I mean, the Odyssey was the first and biggest in some ways, right? Or Beowulf. Yeah, they're very violent, right? Okay. But a monster came up. Bird yourselves into this place. So Beowulf. All right. Somebody comes along and says, you need help with a monster? Yeah. There's going to be prices to pay and death and lingering consequences, but there's also illumination. And we don't tell as many stories about that. It's often about defensiveness, overcoming, because we can be in control of anything if we're just masculine enough and muscular enough and have enough weapons, we can deal with anything. And science fiction has proven that wrong over and over again.
Right.
So I think it's in us to be curious. I think we're working really hard to try to make people not.
Yeah, and I think it is our approach to education. You think about it, and if you really get philosophical, I think that the purpose of education is sort of like a sandbox for life, or it should be. You should approach a topic and say, yeah, look, this is scary, or this is the unknown. Here's how you explore it. Here's how you understand it. Here's how you make use of it. And maybe you'd never master it. Maybe you don't own it, but you come to explore it. You come to interact with it, and it leads you on to other explorations and other interactions.
Try this, right? The tryness of it is being removed,
right, from
state education, certainly. What happens with some of the most important my son's a music teacher. My daughter's an artist. You're an education. You younger folks. But if you teach music, I don't want to oversimplify, but essentially it's often referred to as extras. How dare they? How dare you reduce the essence of art to an extra? Because what does that imply? Oh, it's not necessary. What's really necessary? And when we look at what's really necessary, and then we say in the college curriculum, for instance, well, you can't, the state's giving you student X some financial aid, or the federal government is, and therefore we insist that we will not pay for any class that has nothing to do with your specific choice of career. And by the gods, you better choose that within your first few months. What we're saying is, ignore this, don't go there. We are not interested in helping you be in a sandbox.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's about production. It's about economy.
And commodification.
There's nothing less sublime or awesome than being a cog in an economic machine. So education. I think that the purpose of it should be as your training wheels for life. And so you look at it, and again, in life and in the Sublime, we talked about the horror movies and how maybe you see something amazing and maybe you die, or maybe you see something amazing and you live to tell the tale. Well, the fact is, with life, we never have any of those guarantees.
No.
But we have to do it anyways. And so if the attitude of education is, here are the situations that you might face, here's the ways of exploring them, interacting with them, here are methods of surviving them, methods of experiencing and being curious and surviving, then that's good. But if there's such a fear of failure, or an emphasis on
success, always success
or production, or these sorts of things, then, like you said, the curiosity is removed, and it doesn't prepare you to interact with those things. And as a result, what do you get? You get people who watch a continent burn or watch ice caps melt and don't feel any fear or dread or reverence or awe that the very thing that's giving them life is being destroyed.
Well put. Wonderfully put. Mechanistically, it's disconnecting the feeling part. It's numbing. We have, and there's so many practitioners in education and indeed in every field who are fighting this in all kinds of ways now. But the real, I've been talking with my son the other night. The real challenge is to not be always overwhelmed by the biggest of pictures. There's awesomeness in a child saying, "Oh, I didn't know I could make that bar of music." That's equally sublime in the individual's development to seeing El Capitan for the first time in Yellowstone. It's the small interactions that still matter the most, because if you can feel awe in being able to create music, a piece of art or something, and you can still feel it even if somebody says, "Well, what's that supposed to be?" And you can know inside it's not supposed to be anything. It is a thing that I've created which means something more. And maybe a young one can't articulate it that way, but if they have that, then that mundane pedestrian, well, it's supposed to be something. If I can't tell what it is, it's not worth anything. That mechanistic, that machine business thing, that won't survive if there can be no feeling of that other, well, I've just made this because they told me to make this today. And so, so to speak. That's not a pretty picture with that, but I think there's enough people that are trying to change that maybe if we survive the sublimity of the universe itself and what the consequences of what we've done, then maybe we will be more or be less numb.
Yeah, and it's funny. There's a show that me and my wife watch, The Good Place, it's called.
Yes.
Which is very philosophical in its own fun sort of way. But the most recent episode that they just had, they finally reach this place, and what they find is that everybody's zombies. Because they have just a sort of hedonistic numbness. There's no end, and so for eternity, they have whatever they want, and eventually you try all the things that you wanted to try, and you have all the things you wanted to have, and then it's essentially no better than anything else, And that raises, and their solution to it is that if there's a notion of the end, that's what gives the whole thing purpose. And so they create this door that you can walk through, and that's the end of your existence, And what they found is that whether or not people wanted to walk through the door, having the option to do so gave the things that they were doing in the present more enjoyability. And so if you extrapolate that into real life, what you're looking at is that we're all going to die. And so that endpoint, that termination, is what gives meaning to what we do now. And that's what gives us a feeling of the sublime or awe. Mm-hmm. If we were infinite immortal beings, if we figured out death, we could become an intergalactic species, we could travel the universe, we could see all the things. Eventually we'd figure out solutions to all kinds of problems. And our sense of awe or the sublime might completely disappear, Mm-hmm. And so it shows why that fear or that reverence is an important part of it. Because if you don't have that, eventually things are just going to become bland.
And what is that? I'm gonna. You said that one. Now you've given me something. You don't have to go there, but I'm going to put it on. You can say, okay, another time. Then what is the essence of the being to whom all reverence is supposed to be given? the being who is all-knowing.
Right. Right. And so, yeah, it creates an interesting sort of idea of who God is,
Mm-hmm.
And that's that's one of the places I wanted to go in this was, is awe the origin of religion? Is that where religion came from? Was the notion of awe? Did somebody experience awe, and then that's where religion developed from? Or
there are philosophers who have said, you're familiar with it, that if God didn't exist, we would have had to invent God. Well, why? Because we don't want things to be utterly out of control. That's certainly one thing. It's not the only reason. Right? Why? Because we want there to be purpose embedded in the universe. Because if we had to, and some people do, some people say, well, nope, the universe is random. This is why Nietzsche bothered people, among many other reasons, was, the universe doesn't care. Right? This is what Lovecraft was tapping into.
Right.
He didn't have a worked out, the Cthulhu mythos that people often talk about, as if it was this grand scheme that he laid out and tried to. He wasn't working from a chart on the wall. His interest was in trying to convey the utter sublimity of the horror of a materialistic, not materialistic with the way we understand the word, but it's just a universe that has no designs on us. Maybe some of the old beings walked the earth and wanted to walk that earth and didn't want people around, but it wasn't like, the universe is going to care about you. So right. If the universe doesn't care about you, and you're existentially, your agency is, well, then I have to make my own meaning. Mm-hmm. There's an awesomeness in that too.
Yeah. So you look at it, and really, what defines the difference between horror or a benevolent positive religion or a completely unsettling philosophy is the perspective of the unknown. So if you are just, if the unknown is something that's terrifyingly, incredibly beyond you and powerful, and it has a malignant attitude towards you, that's horror.
Mm-hmm.
And if it has a benevolent attitude towards you, that's religion. And if you're just a flea on a dog that doesn't know you exist, then that's unsettling, because nouns need verbs and form needs structure. And the yin needs yang. We have these ideas, and it's all embedded in language. And this is really bringing us to what I think will be a lot of other interesting topics that I've thought about in the past, and I think we're going to end up doing, which is, a dive into perspective, a dive into, possibly philosophizing about philosophy itself, the very idea of it. A meta.
That's meta philosophy.
Right. Some of these topics. So we'll probably get into them in future shows. Good. But until next time, thanks for listening and keep pondering.